Okay, so let me read you the slogan, and then, as always, I'll talk a little bit, reflecting on what I think the significance of this is. So wakefulness of being asleep. Sometimes the descriptions of the more extraordinary states of mind that meditation reveals can clarify our understanding of the nature of awareness in our subjective experience while shedding light on the very nature of reality. Adept practitioners regularly assert that once they have developed a stable and sustained stillness of mind with powerful wakeful presence that moves beyond the periods of seated meditation and into all aspects of life, that stillness and clarity can then continue into their dream activities. During the night, lucid dreaming becomes available not as some rare event, but as a natural extension of the practice of recognizing and cultivating being restful and inherent awareness. Dream visions appear as before while we are cognizant that we are in a state of dreaming. This quality of wakefulness can then carry over to dreamless sleep, where any content of experience disappears and we are unconsciously sleeping, yet aware of that state. Inherent wakefulness is all-pervasive, both in terms of its continuity and its depth, whatever that word may signify. Every aspect of what makes up our experiential reality, consciously sleeping, yet aware of that state. Inherent wakefulness is all-pervasive, both in terms of its continuity and its depth, whatever that word may signify. Every aspect of what makes up our experiential reality, including any sense of the self as an organizing entity or an essence, is resting in and emerging from that basic space that is some sort of fundamental awareness, a stark ineffability of infinite consequences. And then the question that I pose is a little bit drifting from what I want to talk about, but it really is like these slogans, an invitation to be investigating and inquiring into certain qualities of experience. And so the question is, what is the aspect of your experience in all of its varied displays that remains constant throughout? What is not disturbed or conditioned amidst the flux that is your life? And kind of that question connects to that assertion that everything that constitutes what you're experiencing in your life on and off the cushion, in sleep, in dreamless sleep, in dreams, in wakeful reality, regardless of your sense of clarity or confusion, delusion or enlightenment, there is a basic flavor. Many terms get used for this one flavor, basic space, that there is some fundamental resting ground, emerging ground or emerging fount of reality, which doesn't change, which actually, in a sense, it's pre, to speak temporally, the pre is not, the before is not in time, but before impermanence asserts itself, before all of the flux, all of the changes, all of what we seem to perceive and recognize as this flux of reality, and with the sense of ourselves in it, including that sense of self as something inherently solid, which is not, is resting on this ground, on this fundamental ground of being, which is not accessible to our experience. It cannot be perceived, it cannot be seen in any way, and yet that is precisely what we realize and what we are released into when we gain that quality of complete freedom within all of those manifestations, which means within all of our lives. So from the perspective of the question, it's worthwhile to ask yourself as you're moving through fluctuations of your day, both in terms of the various activities, but also more in terms of the states of mind that you're cultivating, both in and off the cushion, different practices. And then also as you're moving into these other more rarefied or unusual states of consciousness, which would be dream sleep and then dreamless sleep, which kind of gets you close to this place of death and dying, because that is one of the significance of this discussion, which is that in learning about this, in terms of experiencing, having access to it, the promise or the guarantee is that if we can learn, if we can recognize that quality of mind, then our navigation of the space of death, of dying and death, will also be held by exactly the same continuity, meaning that what we're speaking about, this basic space of all phenomena, precedes the manifestation of an individual life, your life, with its apparent birth and its apparent death. That kind of a bubble, or that manifestation, or that emergent quality of experience which we consider our life, is just a bending, a certain constellation of qualities of that fabric, of that basic space. And so in practicing, recognizing, resting, amplifying, and kind of developing a relationship with this quality, we gain true freedom across the full spectrum of what our experience, birth to death, and in the liminal spaces of the in-between states, is informed in a liberating and compassionate way. Now, as exotic as this sounds, this is actually quite straightforward, and this is where I was willing to introduce this into this discussion about calm abiding, because when we're talking in the last 3 or 4 talks, we're all about this interface between attention and awareness. As we become aware of our awareness, we're starting to move towards that place where this quality of this continuous presence of something is actually available, becomes available to us. We can gain recognition of that and develop a sense of continuity, and we can verify what these descriptions speak to. Practically speaking, we all know that lucid dreaming is possible. Many of us have had spontaneous episodes of lucid dreaming, where that quality of wakefulness and recognition that you're actually asleep, that you are dreaming, is available to you. And there is, that can be very spotty. It can be just kind of an immediate glimpse of that. Sometimes you can recognize that when that happens, you gain a certain power or a certain capacities of manipulating the dream within that lucidity, meaning you can do things that are not possible in a conventional sense. You can fly, you can move objects, you can transform. There's a freedom in lucidity that becomes available once we develop a kind of relationship with it. But as I said, that's usually sporadic unless 2 things happen, unless you're actually deliberately practicing lucid dreamings, and there are methods of kind of trying to develop a language or a certain skill set and certain they're not tricks, they're practices that will seem to give you access to it. But the more natural way of doing that is simply by developing ever more powerful presence and awareness in everyday life. So as your sense of calm abiding, as your both attention and awareness deepen, as they become unified, as the kind of unification of body and mind, and all of your, if you were psychological capacities or dynamic capacities or personality capacities, or maybe even further still, how the net of relationships of your being starts to be unified in that process of sitting, that powerful awareness and if you will, the increase in the kind of a quantitative capacity of clarity and precision. So the sense of knowing things, it's like, it's again to kind of demystify things, but when we are aware, when we are capable of learning how to focus our mind, and in focusing our mind, recognizing the open awareness, and then deepening that and recognizing the perfect balance, or developing this sense of unification, at a certain point, the difference between focus and open awareness disappear, and you are just resting in this riveting space of awareness, which obviously is available to you in meditation. And that usually means that you have really burnt up a lot of karma, a lot of the things that were disturbing and kind of derailing that quality of precision. But then that presence moves into your everyday life. So, your capacity, your ability to not be distracted, and it's always, as you're practicing, you realize that the distractibility goes in kind of a sequential order, that at first we collapse our awareness on our stories, on our thoughts, on our cognition. And that's that first layer of recognition of practice where you stop doing that. So, you don't lose open awareness when a thought appears. And there's the kind of claustrophobic collapse of all of your awareness on that thought. So you're losing sense of your larger space. But what's more interesting and challenging is when that qualities of awareness collapses on what used to be a evolutionary skillful adjustment. So, in life-threatening situation, when you were in open awareness and some stimulus that either was frightening or attractive appeared, you would collapse your attention in order to survive or in order to pursue something. But for us, that sense of losing control of our awareness, of losing our awareness when emotional impulses become available, or strong aversion or strong attraction becomes central in the scope of our lives, we just completely collapse that sense of awareness. What happens when that ceases to happen? When in your life, as you're moving through your life, including narratives, including emotional states that would normally cause the constriction of awareness, and then deeper still, patterns of kind of more insidious emotional somatic qualities, which will also, in a very strange human way, pull our attention towards kind of a constriction around these places of, again, some disorganization within you, where probably for sake of unskillfulness, but also maybe protective mechanisms, we kind of do that. As all of that starts to relax, as through meditation, through becoming ever more familiar with this process, we allow the awareness to almost be activated further and deepen when these things appear. That's what the Tibetans refer to as that once you have that sense of awareness, and once you have some understanding of what needs to happen, that fuel of narratives, of strong emotional impulses, of deep insidious somatic places become the fuel actually for that awareness to be kind of more powerful, more lucid, and with all of that material not being denied, but actually being invited to move and to appear and disappear through the process of your mind, without collapse of awareness and then possibility of acting those things out, which always happens when we are constricted, when the sense of attention becomes predominant, and sometimes predominant at completely at the expense of completely removing the sense of what that's all about. The proportion disappears, the context disappears, the relationality disappears, and suddenly a single emotion, a frightening emotion, becomes the only defining quality that's dictating what we do. Okay, and so the kind of fringe benefit, if you will, of just sitting is that all of that material remains absolutely accessible to you. As a matter of fact, it will move through your field of awareness and your field of life with greater ease, and definitely with much less complications in the wake of your passage. And you will be able to act, to feel, to recognize, to create enriching narratives rather than continuously collapsing. And as that awareness becomes available, that's when you start recognizing that there is something constant happening here. At first, it seems like it's just your awareness, but that's the entry point, because you realize at a certain point that your awareness is just another thought, that there is something else, that awareness, or that quality of lucidity, the quality of presence, is something that isn't exactly graspable, and it cannot be claimed by you as your experience even. And yet, obviously, it's not somebody else's experience. And it's here that the mystery, the access to mystery, becomes available. But that's not what I want to talk about. The point of this conversation tonight is about sleeping, about dreaming, because as much as in learning, in calm abiding, the first things that we struggle with, or the first thing that we witness, is the sense of distractibility. And it's primarily distractibility with our thoughts. That is the early, and by early, it can take years to develop a healthy, liberated relationship with your thinking. And recognize thoughts for what they are. Don't let them move through within that space. But somewhere at the point where that comes online, it's the lethargy and the sleepiness that starts to affect our capacity to be aware. So our awareness is continuously disturbed, or we continuously lose track of that open awareness by attention dominating our experience, and this continuous lack of discernment of what actually is happening with our attention, what again we referred to last week as the awareness deficit disorder. So we're just not aware what our mind is doing. We don't have that capacity of stability, of that spaciousness, the lucidity, the ease within which all of this can be happening. So as that gets worked through, and you're actually developing a place where you can rest in more space, that's usually where you notice, can happen earlier, this sense of lethargy, of drowsiness, of sleepiness, and the actual falling asleep. That will start manifesting during meditation, and sometimes even outside of meditation. And that quality, that quality of denseness, of fogginess, completely can absolutely eliminate awareness, so we can actually fall asleep. And the reason why I just brought the other form of awareness, even in midst of sleep, is to kind of underscore how profound the nature of this awareness is. So that never disappears. We lose access to it, okay? And we lose access to it in a very, very, if you will, kind of in a very ordinary way, in that we just simply lose energy. That energy of awareness drains away. That somehow that quality of lucidity, quality of sharpness, of impeccability of our presence gets sucked away, and energy dissipates. And how that happens is fascinating. And it's actually in some ways more interesting to study, and sometimes more difficult, because of the fact that you have to be awake to be studying your falling asleep. But with practice, you'll actually learn to do that you'll learn to recognize the signals and the signs that are saying that something is going on. So I will take these topics up later in the further talks and kind of dissect them with a little bit more precision. But there's really 3 reasons why we fall asleep while we're meditating. One is very basic, is that we're tired, and we basically are needing sleep. we're needing rest, and we don't have anywhere close of practice and ability to recognize that wakefulness as we're falling asleep. That at some point might be possible. As a matter of fact, that's what the Sloan is talking about. There are moments where, as you're falling asleep in bed and going to sleep, you can actually stay aware. You can stay in contact with that awareness that permeates even a dreamless sleep, permeates our unconsciousness. But obviously, when we're beginning this, that is just not possible. So the thing that will happen is that you will fall asleep, and you'll be asleep till you're falling asleep. And that is simply due to fatigue. Sometimes it has to do literally with what's happening in your life, the quality of maybe being out of touch with what you need, with your quality to rest. It may have to do with your inability to actually understand how to rest and how to even maybe rest in your meditation in a lucid way. So there is a learning that happens about what that is and how to recognize that and how to use and develop a relationship with meditation based on that. So sometimes it means don't sit, because you do not want to introduce that habit pattern into your sitting. So if you truly are asleep or sleepy, one, don't sit. Two, sit for short periods of time to actually activate yourself. But deliberately sit down for 10 minutes where you would be sitting for 30, knowing that you are very, very sleepy and you need to go to bed. But for those 10 minutes, absolutely commit with 110% sense of clarity to that period of time, so you can be learning what that feels like, what your awareness, what your attention feel like in that state. The other reason, or the other cause for sleepiness, is that we are actually not familiar with what happens when thoughts start to fade out. When the quality of spaciousness of mind really opens up and there's much less activity. We are so used to the buzz, the movement of our scattered attention and collapse and opening, that when things really open up, like you don't know what to do. And the reflex is it's time to go to sleep. Nothing is happening. And that usually simply has to do with the fact that your refinement of focus hasn't happened yet. You're not noticing how much more is actually available to you. It's simply a matter of being used to something and something different starting to manifest. And there's no question that the subtle levels of drowsiness will show up precisely where things are opening up and you have access to that spaciousness. And it's so much so that the quality of kind of a softness of experience can masquerade as deep sense of insight. It's what's called pseudo-nirvana, that like you kind of get into these blissed out states, but you're actually not lucid. You are operating in reality, which is a bit foggy. The clarity, the precision of what actually is manifesting is not available to you. And that, as I said, has to do with developing a relationship and testing those places, pressing into those places when that openness manifests. Third reason to fall asleep is protective. You're actually protecting yourself from material appearing from the psyche that you want to screen out. So it's not unusual. And again, when you deepen your practice and you're starting to get close to information, feelings, stories that are not acceptable for us to witness, where we can't witness ourselves, we will fall asleep. And that can be very dramatic. Literally, sometimes people just check out. They're just not ready to witness what may be coming up. That can be dramatic. Sometimes it could be, again, concealed in these forms of fogginess, lethargy, disinterest. So it's really about that I wanted to that's what I wanted to highlight in this talk, because I said it would be worthwhile to unpack that in a little bit more detail. We may do that in the upcoming talks, to become familiar with this sense of disconnecting, of withdrawing from life on the cushion and off the cushion, where we're kind of in but not in, when this level of lethargy penetrates our life. And then that can manifest, as depression, as withdrawal, as all sorts of other, these kind of larger schema that frequently have to do with some of these conditions, especially this sense of remaining asleep to an interior process that is not yet ready for light, for actually witnessing, for appearance in our field of awareness. So I'll stop here as always. And if you do want to, share a few things, like I said before, sometimes these questions are always useful to people who might be listening to this later. So if you have anything to add, to ask, please. Yeah, Joe, please.
Ryushin, I'll just note, I note your use of the word fabric, and it brought the visual to mind of the sheet that you've experimented with,
right,
a number of times, and it seems to me that that this whole talk is in a sense a reflection, or kind of playing with that sheet. And if I'm understanding correctly, that sheet is a representation of both concentration and open awareness, if my understanding is correct.
The way I would say it, and what Joe is referring to is this metaphor, analogy for the relationship between, if you will, the wholeness, the underlying wholeness of our experience, and the emergent quality of what we perceive as a sense of self. And the classic analogies of the ocean and waves. And it's a good one. It's just that the similar analogy that I use when I just use a sheet of clothing that I then tangle up and kind of show people that a sense of self is this kind of an emergent quality of conditioned tightness that at a certain point becomes self-aware for some reason, unexplainable but present, that the continuity with the sheet never ends. What just happens in that tightness is that the experience of that tightness includes the fact that there is separation, there is dualism, there is a sense of forgetting that the continuity never ceases. To the point of which you're bringing up, Joe, is that concentration and awareness as practices and abilities of that tightness, of that tightening, of that self-representation, or of that sense of self, are actually just methods or ways that we can recognize, or we can remember, if you will, the fact that that continuity of awareness takes us somewhere well beyond the constriction and the individuation, or the apparent individuation of the self that emerges from that what that sheet is, that's that basic space, that fundamental quality, which is, outside of time, outside of space, or before time, before space, and yet very much absolutely necessary for all of this dynamically to manifest as our lives, as me, as you, as interactions, as our delusion, as our enlightenment, as our clarity, included with it, with the sense that there are practices that for us as individuals, taking it up as individuals, these methods of learning something about our attention, our perception of how it is that we experience ourselves as this tightening of reality, actually allows us to recognize something which is continuously existent, which isn't being created by you and me. It's not even that it's a relaxation of that tightness. It's a relaxation within that tightness. And I mean, I've played with it. I mean, you're playing to my strong suit, because it's like once you hit the sheet, like there are always ever more kind of places that I can use that sheet to recognize, the different forms of realization. Some of them, the tightening of the self actually completely disappears. And for a moment, there is no sense of self-reference until that sheet tangles itself up again. And then you go, oh my God, like, what was that? For others, you actually remain tight. And something about the movement within that tightening of that sheet, the practices or whatever, make you recognize it without needing to completely disorganize into the non-referential place of experience. But attention and awareness are just two qualities available to that unit of selfhood, as it's trying to discover its nature. And it's very much connected in some fundamental way to that continuity. The fact that something is constant in all of this. Something remains singularly not responsible, but contributing, identical to our moments of play like this one. I hope that helped. All right. I appreciate your presence here. You're helping others. Like I said, it definitely makes this possible. If I'm not going to say easier, like I couldn't. I would not be able to talk without somebody being on the receiving end of this. Or at least I haven't tried doing that, and it feels kind of funny to be able to do it. So please keep showing up. Next weekend is going to be Sunday. Is that right? Yeah. On Sunday, I'll be able to do this from at 2:00. Yeah. So next Sunday at 4:00, we'll probably talk a little bit more about falling asleep. All right. My love to you. Be well.